Helen Jaccard. I've been a member of the Prince of Peace since 2006, and I'm really happy to be here to speak with you guys today. So, if you haven't already, you might want to pick up one of these fact sheets. So there's over 10,000 abandoned uranium mines in the United States, and 1 in 7 people lives within 50 miles of an abandoned uranium mine. They're concentrated in the western United States, as you can see in this map here. There's some in several places on the East Coast and down in the south in Texas and Florida. But they're primarily concentrated in the lands of the Navajo Nation and the Great Sioux Nation. They're usually on federal and tribal lands. Most of the uranium mining is done under the Mining Act of 1872, which says that if it's on federal property, the best use of federal property is mining. So companies go in, they do the mining, they don't have to clean up, they don't have to pay any royalties, nothing. They just get to mine federal property for free. So we've got all these mines, and there's no federal laws requiring us to clean things up. There is some cleanup going on. The Navajo Nation has a 5-year plan in conjunction with the EPA to work on cleaning up their most serious sites. Of the 10,000 plus abandoned uranium mines, 4,200 approximately were used to make bombs. And the ones that are in the Department of Defense database, and we know that this was what they were used for because we have the purchase records from those mines. And Congress just put out a series of 4 reports about those sites, and they have done remediation, but not reclamation. They've done reclamation, but not remediation, on about 400 of them. And they're doing a pretty good job because they're not just moving the dust around, moving the dirt around, but they're actually digging a trench with multiple linings in it, putting the waste in there, covering it up, trying to keep the water from coming through the mine waste. And that's in addition, so then that gets clay and soil and grass seed on top of it to try to stabilize it so that it won't erode and so that the water won't seep through there and dissolve the uranium. The uranium mine cleanup process is rather difficult. Not only do you have to do this trenching and possibly dig down 3 to 6 feet wherever there's contamination, put that soil in the trench, but if you have uranium very close to the surface, you're exposing it to the air. And what that does is change the chemistry of the uranium such that it is more dissolvable in water. So even the cleanup efforts are very touchy, and you have to do, a lot of water remediation when you're doing this kind of work. And there are companies that specialize in this kind of thing. And there are communities that use a Good Samaritan law to train somebody. It takes about a year of training to be certified as a cleanup person, but anybody can go through it. And then that person will help lead a community towards cleaning up an abandoned uranium mine. So it can be done. So the team that I'm with cleaned up the mines. We went and did a site visit in South Dakota, and we measured the radioactivity at a school where there's a supposedly cleaned up mine up on the hill near them, and found that the levels of radiation at that playground are about 10 to 11 times greater than what would be allowed for people to return to their community near Fukushima Daiichi. So we just discovered that there's severe radiation near this school. And it's a shame because the state wanted to close down the school because of its small population. And now we're having to report it to the health department to say, you guys have to get this uranium mine cleaned up. We visited the Cheyenne River where we had a kickoff of our campaign at Red Shirt Village. It's part of the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. And the Cheyenne River is dead. nothing grows there because of the multitude of abandoned uranium mines that are in their community, and they can't drink their water. Charmaine Whiteface is the initiator of this campaign. She's been working on this problem for over 20 years. And she went and took a sample of water from Red Shirt Village that the EPA and the Indian Water Department thought was clean because they were bringing water in from elsewhere. And although there wasn't an above standard amount of uranium in the water, the amount of thorium in the water was 6 times more radioactive than the radiation standard for uranium. But there's no standard for thorium. So they're drinking this polluted water, as are their animals. Of course, they've got to use it for their plants and everything. And they don't have a clean source of water. So we're talking about doing a pilot program, trying to find a big grant to provide a reverse osmosis system for this community as a way to heal the wounds of the war against the indigenous people of the United States, which is how this fits into Veterans for Peace mission. Part of it is healing the wounds of war, and this is a big wound of the ongoing genocide against the indigenous people of the United States. So what we're doing, we have a bill that Congressman Grijalva of Arizona is going to be introducing this session that puts a complete moratorium on new licenses and renewal of licenses for uranium mining, and also mandates a complete inventory of all the uranium mines in the United States, mandate for prioritizing the order that they get cleaned up in, which is by health rather than by accessibility. So it's, impact on health and impact on the environment rather than what's being done right now, which is how easily can we get in there and do the cleanup. And we're calling for public oversight of the whole process, complete transparency, as opposed to what's going on with the DoD sites that they're cleaning up where I can't get the raw data. Maybe eventually they'll release it, but their database has much more information than I've been able to gather on my own so far. And then we're calling for the best standards possible for cleanup. Whereas right now they get away with just pushing the toxic dirt around, we're calling for a really good standard that will protect the women and the children, as well as everybody else, from subsequent radiation after cleanup is done. The abandoned uranium mine near Ludlow School was supposedly cleaned up. So we know that there's no standards and there's no monitoring, and therefore we can't say that it was actually cleaned up at all. So I would encourage you to go to our website and look up what's going on with Clean Up the Mines. And after you're a bit educated, you might want to call your congressperson and say, I understand the bill is being presented by Grijalva's office. You might want to take a look at what's going on and get the status of that bill. And every time there's a phone call or an email made, it's one more tick saying, oh, we should pay attention to this. Well, we're not going to wait for Congress to act. We're starting to talk about maybe cleaning up a mine in conjunction with an active community, or we're talking about at least educating people about the dangers of the radiation from the abandoned uranium mines. So I made this talk kind of fast and quick because I've done a couple of weeks of research that I thought you guys might be interested in, and that's an update on what's happening in Fukushima. Yes?
It sounds like there's a one-year training to get the community people to clean up. What protections do they have? Or how are they protected while they're trying to clean?
It's called the Good Samaritan Act. And what it is, of course it trains you in safely doing cleanup, like wearing respirators, the paper suits, dosimeters, how to recognize and avoid dangers. all kinds of things that probably go into that training that I'm not familiar with. But it's one of the requirements to indemnify the community, and only one person needs to be trained in the community. But it's a matter of having somebody on site when you're doing we don't own it, we didn't operate it, we didn't create the problem, we have no vested interest in it except protecting our own community. That's how that one works. So it sounds like a good thing to have on the books so that if something happens that happens to expose more radiation while you're doing the cleanup, then you're not going to be held liable under the Clean Water Act or Clean Water Act. It's basically what that's for. Any other questions before I switch over to Fukushima?
How would that feel? This is being introduced in the Senate?
He's a congressman in the House. And we think Bernie Sanders might introduce it in the Senate.
Ooh.
This is the beginning of the nuclear cycle. What we really need to do is just leave it in the ground and clean up the mess we've already made. Yes?
And Grahava's bill has not been introduced yet. It's in the final
We're
stages of.
finishing the wording of it, and then it goes to the Legislative Council to actually put it in the legalese that's required for congressional bills. And then it gets introduced and goes to committee, where most things die. But we have some hope. I mean, the Uranium Mill Tailings Act has been working on cleaning up the mills that are associated with these mines. So, you take the rocks out of the ground, you haul them over to the mill, crush them up, mix them with chemicals, and get the yellow cake uranium out of there that the companies and the government wants to buy. So with the mills being cleaned up, I think we have hope, maybe not this Congress, maybe not the next Congress, but I think that we have hope of getting this law passed. And even if the federal law doesn't pass, New Mexico has a really good state law. So if we have to, we can copy the American Legislative Exchange Council's method and do everything state by state until the feds finally get it. So that's my hope.